No way I could sing that. Woo! Thank you. Great job. Well, good morning. Welcome to the garden. I'm glad you're all here with us today. And I want to say a word of thanks to Betty Ellison for filling in last week and talking about prayer so I could have a Sunday off. But I had the rare opportunity of being able to be here to hear her, and I appreciate what she had to say. You need to realize that when, with everybody except Stan who comes here, Rob French, Nancy Lafferty, some of those other folks who share their messages, that these are folks who have real jobs in the daytime. They do other things in the rest of their life, and yet they are able to bless our lives by what they bring to us. So we owe them all a big word of thanks for their taking that little extra effort to do that. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah. Well, in the fall, there was an article in the Indianapolis Star that one of you brought to my attention. It was about the Colts defensive end, Corey Redding. Apparently, on his car, he has a license plate that has the letters HTRA on it. And when he was asked what that meant, he said it stood for Have the Right Attitude. Well, he was the first call that Coach Pagano made on the first moment of the first day of the free agent draft in 2012. He's been in the NFL for 10 years, and Pagano knew and admired his work, and he believed that he was the kind of person that this newly forming team, which had so many young players on it, was going to need to be like the cornerstone of the team. He had this great work ethic, and he gave his best 24/7, and could serve as a really strong role model for the rest of his teammates. In the time that he's been here, he's gotten very involved in our community as well. He, through his foundation, has gotten connected with the Longfellow Magnet Middle School on the east side of the city. And for every home game during this past season, he invited 7 students from the school who demonstrated the kind of characteristics he was trying to help them develop. And they, along with a family member and then a teacher, would come to the game, and they could be on the sidelines some of the game, and then they would meet Corey Redding after the game outside the locker room, and of course they took pictures. But then he made it a point to always share a message of some sort with them, to use it as a teaching moment. And he almost always drew from something that had happened in the game that had just preceded that short visit. And in the case of this article being written, the game that he was talking about was the game where the Colts had this remarkable comeback and beat the Green Bay Packers. Sorry, Ted Mast, but beat the Green Bay Packers. And so what he said to those kids at that time was, when everyone counts you out, don't you count yourself out. You can come back. You can do or be anything you want to be. And so he has made this kind of impact already in our community. And because of things like that, he was voted by the team as the Colts Man of the Year. And apparently every NFL team selects a Man of the Year who then, I guess, competes for the one who's the NFL Man of the Year. So he's in the running for that kind of thing. Well, shortly after his arrival, Jay Forsyth had this interview and asked him to talk a little bit more about this HTRA thing. And he said this: it stands for Have the Right Attitude. There are a lot of things that you can't control, but you can control your attitude. You have the ability to wake up every day with a positive or negative attitude. The choice is yours. Now, I suppose some of us might quickly jump to the conclusion and say, well, yeah, that's easy for him to say. After all, he's a celebrity of sorts, an NFL player, and he probably has all the money he needs. And, sure, it'd be nice to have, with all that, you can have a good attitude. But we need to understand that he's had this good attitude, but he hasn't had an easy life. He was raised in a single-parent household in Houston, Texas. His dad was in and out of his life till he was about 8 and then disappeared completely. He talked about his playing career all the way through. He'd always had a lot of injuries, and he said even now there are times that he cannot walk up and down the stairs of his house, and yet he continues to play and serve as this role model because he feels that is his duty to do. He gives credit to his Uncle Charles for really getting him on the right path. His uncle had served in Vietnam, and he was the one who introduced to him the importance of having a good attitude, and it stayed with him. He said that he understands having a good attitude as having several dimensions to it. One is doing the right thing. Secondly is doing it every single time. And third is always, always looking for the positive, looking for the good. I know people, and I bet you do too, whose glass is always half empty rather than half full. They're always whining or complaining about what's not there and what's missing and what's wrong. And, there's a point at which that can be helpful if it helps us improve and get better. But if that's what we always do, it can really suck the lifeblood out of you. Scott Hamilton, the skater, said this: "The only disability is a bad attitude." And I believe that's very true. So how do we choose to live differently? Someone has said that the only difference between a good day and a bad day is the attitude we bring to it. So how do we develop the right kind of attitude, the good attitude that makes every day a good day? Well, I think our Bible passage may be helping us point in the right direction, because I think it has something to do with how we choose to focus our thoughts, our thinking, what we fill our minds with and what we fill our hearts with. And I think that's what Paul is talking about. He's writing to the people at Philippi, and he's trying to help them realize that they need to think about what is good if they want to experience the good life. This is what they say: "From now on, brothers and sisters, if anything is excellent and if anything is admirable, focus your thoughts on these things: all that is true, all that is holy, all that is just, all that is pure, all that is lovely, and all that is worthy of praise. Practice these things. Whatever you learned, received, heard, or saw in us, the God of peace will be with you." Now, the way I understand this is Paul is basically saying that to have a good attitude, you have to choose to have a good attitude. You have to be deliberate about it. And if, in fact, we find ourselves giving in to negative thoughts or some fearful kinds of feelings, that we need to stop it. We need to take control of that, exhibit some self-control, and bring it to a halt, to stop our complaining, to stop talking about that which is negative, and instead to do that which is more life-giving, which is more fulfilling. I guess I would have to admit to you, I hate to do this, but I have to tell you that sometimes I'm more negative than I wish I were. But thank goodness I live with the person I do in my household, because my husband Mike is a very positive, upbeat person. He has this wonderful attitude toward life, and he doesn't criticize me. He'll just say something that I begin to understand. Yeah, you've been kind of a downer here, McCoy, because he'll say, like, we are so blessed. We are so lucky. We have such a good life. And I know he's right. And that's the reminder I need, that very often what we put out there, we get back. What we reap, so we also sow. In fact, someone by the name of Terry Gilliam put it like this: "Give goodness to the day, and before you know it, the day will be giving goodness to you." Well, that's indeed true. I think if we put out negativity, we're going to get negativity back. But if we put out that which is positive, that which is good, that which is true, that which is hopeful, that's the kind of thing we're going to get back. But it's up to us. We get to choose what we're going to look into the world with. I've mentioned to you before a book that made an impact on me when I first read it, and it continues to impress me. It's a story by Viktor Frankl in his book called A Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about being a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II and what he and the other prisoners experienced. He said, for example, they had lost everything. Their families were gone. Their home was gone. Their professions were taken from them. They even took their names from them, and they just had numbers that were put on them. And that's all they had, was that number that identified who they were. And yet Viktor Frankl was able to say this: "Everything can be taken from a man or a woman, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." I think sometimes we all think that our attitude is shaped by what happens to us, by the circumstances in which we find ourselves. But that's really not true, and it's been proven to not be true, because sometimes we see people who literally have had everything taken from them, who still bring forward from them a good attitude and think about that which is good and that which is right and that which is true. And I think part of the reason they're able to do that is that's the way they look at the world. That's what they see. And they have this sense of the gratitude that they have, the appreciation that they have for life. And those are the kind of people I want to be like, the people who can always be grateful for what is and come at the world with a good attitude, with a good spirit. The poet Khalil Gibran talks about how we choose to see the world makes a difference. He says this: "Your living is determined not so much by what life brings to you as by the attitude you bring to life. Not so much by what happens to you as by the way your mind looks at what happens." Well, you may be wondering, how in the world do we get to that place where our mind looks at what's good, and it's the attitude we bring that really makes a difference in our lives? I think it has something to do with our connection with God and our spiritual well-being. If we have at the very core of our being this sense that we are loved always and forever, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from God's love. And if we understand that even everything can be lost, but God is never lost, that God is always with us, then we can be filled with a sense of hope and a sense of confidence and that sense of trust. It's the kind of trust that will help us get through these storms of life that inevitably come. You see, we cannot choose what happens to us. All we can choose is how we're going to look at what happens to us, how we're going to respond to what happens to us. To use a sailing analogy, we cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. So if we have a spirit of HTRA, having the right attitude, I think we will see that it makes a huge difference in life and in the way we live and flourish. In fact, I'm convinced of it.